All right, let's get started. Good morning, everyone. Doug, can you hand this one out for me? I will. You're the first man up. All right. I think we've about got everybody in here, and Barbara and I came up here Friday night and made my copies, and Barbara and I went to Yellowstone yesterday to spend some time looking for bear, and kind of tell a story right quick before we get started. I've said that I grew up in the South, and I still have the Southern accent, and I still have some of the Southern twang, or whatever slang they call it. But Barbara and I was there a few months ago, and we were watching a bear, a big grizzly bear, dig and dig and dig and dig and dig, getting ready for winter. And a couple came up, and she couldn't speak English very well at all. And so I said hello to her, and then he came up and said, well, what are you looking for? And I said, there's a bear over there. And Barbara didn't say anything to me for a while, and then she lit me up. So, and last night I come in, and we was tired, and I was getting ready to study and get everything ready, and then saw where somebody had tried to shoot several people in the correspondence dinner. And so I watched that for a while. My grandson was working on the table, working on Legos. And so anyway, it was about 2 o'clock before I got to sleep. Letting him get through with his thing and then looking over my stuff. And then this morning I started to eat some breakfast, which was a Coke and peanut butter crackers. And then the peanut butter crackers stick to the back of my throat and I can't get it down. So I may sound really weird this morning. It is just stuck there. All right. I handed out 2 sets of sheets. Go to the one that says the setting of the church. And we've talked about some of these things, but to iterate, did you get him some stuff, please? All right. We've read Galatians 4:4, but I didn't bring my Bible this morning, so if I could get somebody to read that for us again. This is talking about that God prepared a special timing for all this to happen. And there's going to be several things that are going to be putting this together and making the church explode, but with explosions is going to come complications. So if somebody would read Galatians 4:4. Okay, when the time had fully come. So who's in charge here? God is. God's in charge. He didn't send him too early and he didn't send him too late. And these are three of the main things that's going to be happening. The influence of Rome, which was political. The influence of Greeks, which is intellectual. But the problem with that is going to cause the Greeks are going to be, it gives us a good setting, but the intellectuals think they're smarter than everybody else because they're using philosophy. And the influence of the Jews, even though we did a bunch of studies about the Jews and their background, there's still a thought that there's going to be a Messiah come along. All right, at the bottom here. The world to which Jesus Christ came and in which the church was born was one that God had uniquely prepared. We can view this through the lens of three lenses. The Romans dominated the world, bringing an era of peace. Can Christianity grow easily if there's not peace? No, it's more difficult. The Greeks gave the world a common language, and the Jews expected the coming of the Anointed One, though they viewed the Messiah as a political figure rather than a spiritual redeemer. All right, the next page, please. The concept of authority in the early church. God first, Christ the Savior second. Did you get sheets? You need some? You all right? Okay, I can get you some. Okay. Christ was the person that was sent to earth, then the apostles, then the apostles' successors. So over in the box it says a succession of bishops from God through Christ in the churches. A single apostolic successor in each church that is a bishop. What's the term for a bishop? Elder or an overseer. So that's the succession. And there's going to be a lot. Did you get paperwork? Okay. There's going to be a lot of things happening in the first 2 or 3 centuries that is going to be challenging the church big time. All right. Is someone read that last section there for us? If you can read it. Yes. All right. Okay. Now, is there anything wrong with this? Well, if you're having a bishop in charge, and he's the overseer, and a lot of stuff starts coming at the church, and he's the main authority, is that going to push him and elevate him? I have worked in churches where the preacher made all the decisions and said in all the board members, trustees meetings, all these things. And you didn't spend a penny without the preacher. You didn't make any decisions without the preacher. And so there was no elders or overseers. Now, they had trustees, but it's kind of like a school board. The school board comes in, and the principal's already, and superintendent's done kind of put it all together and just hand it to them and says, this is what needs to be done. Well, I don't know anything about that. So anyway, the next page. This is going to give you a line of succession at the top. And you are going to see so many different things, but we're going to narrow it down to just a few of what's going on with different groups or people that are going to push things in the early church that is going to emerge into Roman Catholicism. All right. At the very left, we see in the center the apostolic age, 30 to 100. At the top, above that, is Gnosticism. We are studying that and trying to get a good concept of what, so they basically were overtaking the church. And then below the apostolic age is Ebionites and Judaizers. Then the next, if you scoot over to the right just a little bit, the emerging Catholic tradition. What do we say Catholic means? Universal. So it hasn't turned Roman. Constantine has not made it an official religion. It is just the universal Catholic Church, meaning the Christian church. But above that is the Marcionites are going to emerge, and they're going to be part of the church. And down below that, the Donatists, which we kind of mentioned before, and the Montanist. And one of the things that's going to happen is that with all these different factions coming into the church, the Catholics they have an oral tradition, which was passed on by the apostles, but do they have anything written yet in the very beginning? How long is it before some of the scriptures are actually written? 20, 30 years? 20 years at least. And so it's oral tradition, and they're all coming back to the concept of Christ born, crucified, buried, resurrection, and that's the main gospel. And then it's going to get distorted later. All right, to the far right. Age of the ecumenical councils, development of the Christian empire, 325 to 800. We won't talk about it later, but Constantine, how many of you have heard of Constantine? Well, later we have a country called Constantinople. That's not the same. But anyway, Constantine, if I remember correctly, is going in a battle, and he said, God, if you are real, I need a sign. Anybody know what the sign was? He looked, and in the cloud, a cross appeared. Sir? A flaming cross. He said, that's my sign. Now, this is going to be in the 380s, something other, a little bit later. But then he says, well, if I want to unify my country, I am in control. I'm going to make the Catholic Church a universal religion. And so now you mix politics and religion tightly. But we've had all these other groups here making problems with the church. All right, let's go look up to the top. Arianism, Nestorians, and the iconoclast. What's an icon? A symbol or an image, and I'll hand you out sheets later of all the different Christian symbols that are going to be developed, not just the cross, the fish, a lot of different crosses, a lot of different things. I'll give you a copy of that and let you look at some of the stuff. I think there's 2 or 3 pages of them. And so the reason I brought up the 3-ring binder, I'm going to hand you out a lot of things that are going to be on paper and go, they're trying to bring the Catholicism together and make it where it makes sense. All right. Down at the bottom, Monophysites, the Coptic Christians, and the Armenians. How many of you have ever heard of R.C. Sproul? Gary put his hand up. You've heard of him. Very great theologian. Floyd's actually got a bunch of his tapes, and so, or has had some, but I like to listen to him, but boy, he got over my head real quick. And he's passed away now. He was still talking and giving interviews and debates wearing an oxygen mask, not oxygen mask, but oxygen. And he said breathing caused him problems because trying to breathe, and then he had hearing aids, and he was having trouble hearing. But I loved to listen to him, but he was too deep for me. Great teacher. All right. How many of you heard of the arguments of the Armenians? Okay, one hand raised up. All right, then we don't want to look at the bottom. Well, we do want to look at one thing. On the left at the bottom, Middle Ages, there is going to happen around the 500s, a split in the church, and it's not going to be the great split, but it's going to develop into Eastern religion of the Catholic Church. It's going to be the development of the Eastern Orthodoxy, Byzantine Empire, and the development of the Western Catholicism. And that's going to go on from 500 to 1054. And in 1054, if I remember correctly, that is the Great Schism between the Roman Catholic Church in the West and the Byzantine Empire and the Byzantine and Eastern Orthodox. Now, is Orthodox the same as the ordinary person? Or ordinary Christian? Kind of sounds more like fundamentalist, doesn't it? In other words, strict traditions. All right. Look at the next page, please. I'd take mine out because it's sideways. Yours probably is too. On the right, it's going to have what's called the pendulum effect in church history. And the center of the cross is biblical Christianity. On the left at the top, in each one of these sections, is monotheism, the 2nd century. Then the 3rd and through the 10th century is monasticism, and then it's going to be mysticism in the 14th and 15th century, and pietism in the Methodist, or the method of teaching, because the Methodist Church You need copies? Or are you going to look on his? You're fine? All right. And down at the bottom is the Pentecostal and the Charismatic movement. 20th century. I think the Pentecostals come around 1911 or something. Now that is the emphasis on emotion. On the right is the emphasis on intellect. Gnosticism, 2nd and 3rd centuries. Scholasticism. What's the term for scholasticism? When you're talking about scholastics, what we took. Whoa, almost fell. That'd been cute with all my problems. Scholasticism, what do you send a student to college for? Scholastics. Higher education, the intellect. Are you really going there for emotions? Not unless you're wild and getting drunk. All right. So, the third one on the right is Reformation or Orthodoxy. You're going to have the Reformation come along, and who's the one that starts the Reformation? Martin Luther. Because, and I'll just say this real quick, the Catholic Church is selling indulgences. Catholic Universal. And the indulgences are, they're trying to raise money for a big church. And so you go to the priest and say, I've got X amount of dollars of absolving my sins forward, and so you can sin as much as you want to. And so Martin Luther says, I think he puts up 95 theses on the Catholic door and says, no, this is not Christianity. And so you see as things are changing, the swinging of the left to the right, back and forth, and Martin Luther is going to start a Reformation, and then later 3 groups are going to come out of the Reformation, because I'll give you all these different groups of churches that are split off. But there's 3 churches that come out of that that's going to be called the Restoration. Not reforming the church, but restoring the church to the 1st century. Anybody name the 3 churches? No, that's the Protestant Reformation, the protesters. Church of Christ, Disciples of Christ. What's the third one? Somebody help? Disciples of Christ. I had to come back on that one because I can't. Right now I'm blank. But anyway, those 3 are going to. Remember Campbell and Stone? Anybody heard of Campbell and Stone in the debates? Alexander Campbell. I can't think of Stone's name. But anyway, they came from denominations and saying, this isn't purely the 1st century. And one's going to stay pretty well close to the original, the 1st century. One's going to become instrumental music, and one's going to become a lot more liberal. And so that's where the Churches of Christ came about, I think 1800s. But anyway, that just kind of gives you an idea. If you look on the left, the theological profile of American religions. We're not going to study all these, but you're going to have charts showing where all the divisions in here, like the Southern Baptist. I cleaned a church that was a Baptist church, and you have all these conventions. Southern Baptist Convention, the more moderate and the more liberal ones. This church had 4 conventions they were part of. And so, of the different organizations. So you look to the right of each one of these churches, well, look down about halfway, you'll see Churches of Christ. United Churches of Christ. Over to the right, it says moderate or L liberal or O orthodox. Churches of Christ are what? A little more orthodox because we're trying to follow the first century. Let's see. Roman Catholic is moderate to liberal. Southern Baptist is orthodox. And so, women preachers, orthodox, following the traditions of the first century. All righty. Any questions on that? The pendulum. What's the problem with the pendulum? What if it swings back and forth? What are they swinging from? Extreme to extreme. If you have a clock, for it to be on time, it just does this, doesn't it? But if you think of the extremes, it goes way up here and way up over here. And so the liberal setting or belief system is way over here, and the orthodox is way over here. If you're trying to follow the first century, you want to try to be in the center. Not saying that every church has got that right, because you've got Baptist churches today that basically are pretty close to what first century. You've got other churches that are. But when I was growing up, there were very few churches, and it was pretty well, they weren't extreme or anything, but then things for growth started really being pushed. All righty. Now you have another set of pages. 2 pages, I think. Last week we were covering at the very bottom of the page, and you don't have this one unless you brought last week's. And I'll just read the last sentence here, a couple of sentences. Effects of Gnosticism on the church. You had the Gnostics claim to be a universal religion which forced the church to assert Catholicism of her own position. The church had to state the divine inspiration of the Old and New Testament. Church leaders also had to determine the contents of the New Testament canon. So in the beginning, they didn't have a canon, and it's going to be a long time before they actually get together. And you're going to see some people of these lists I showed you, monetists and different ones, that are going to force the church to say, we've got these bishops, and they're our authority, but guess what? All these other groups are pushing against them, and they're having a hard time fighting against it. All right. And the last thing, Gnosticism contended with Christianity, that Christianity was fundamentally a doctrine and a church. And then go the first page on that next list. A, Roman Catholic Quietists and Quakers. How did I say that Quakers received their knowledge of addition to Scripture? 12 of them sit in a room, and how did they get their knowledge? Direct inspiration from the divine. That's going to be kind of like who? The Gnostics get their revelation from the divine. All right, this is going to get kind of weird, some of the next 2 pages. It's going to be, the world is going on with these people. All righty. C, these groups overemphasize a metaphysical absorption of man's spiritual essence into the divine being in here and now. A metaphysical absorption. Why Gnosticism? Can somebody read the first 4? I'm getting to where I can't hardly talk. Well, if you ask a lot of people today, you would say the church is dry and boring because we don't use. There was a church close to us that spent fortunes on entertainment. And they would have these men's conferences. And I'll just say this. There was a lot of people, they brought in lots of people, and they cannibalized a lot of different churches. And they took all the talent from those churches, and what got them in trouble was the preacher asked a man to come, and they had a men's conference, and he had a pole, and he did somewhat of a striptease in front of the whole church. And so that became because he took his clothes off the top, he was just muscle bound, and the preacher said, well, he's a Christian, and he come back later and said, no, that's not what I am. No, and he denied some of the stuff. And he was an entertainer that was kind of like, and he actually did the pole dance and turned sideways and put his legs out and all that. And so it was a big controversy. But they would do about anything to grow the church. And that's kind of what we're fighting here. The ancient world, All right. Already? Next paragraph, please, or 2 paragraphs. Read that for us. Somebody? Nobody? So who's ruling through time here in the church? The heathen. Go ahead and read the next paragraph, please. Okay, we're going to see on the next page where they think that this God is like a water fountain, like you go see in a park. And he is so excessive, so brilliant, so overwhelming that all his spirituality is just going to overflow like a fountain. And as it overflows, he's going to create man. And as he creates man, in that overflow, it's going to put a spiritual being. And that spiritual being is going to try to be absorbed back into him. What does a fountain do? It gets its water after it's been overflowed, picks it back up and takes it to the top, back to the top, and then all over again. So he created us and put us here, but our final judgment is to be turned around and absorbed back into him. This is an intellectual thought. You could only do that as a Gnostic with a secret knowledge because you were the intellectual aristocrat. These people Created a lot of division. All right, Gnosticism divided men into three classes. Spiritual, well, yes, the spiritual knowledge is good enough, and we're going to see that the average person could works and get into that, like being accepted into inner knowledge, or you're going to be just a practical nobody, and you just can't go to heaven. You're just out. You don't have a choice. You can't be drawn to God, accepted by God. You're just a waste of basically God's energy. And so all this overflow created man, but he gave you levels that you can't get there. All right, Gnosticism divides men in three areas. Spiritual, are a true Christian or Gnostic, of whom there are few. By nature, pneumatic, meaning the life is being breathed into you from this overflow. Spiritually, naturally, are the chosen or saved. Second class was the Jews and the Christians, who had faith but not gnosis. The psychics, or ordinary Christians, might be saved through faith and good works. And the carnal, or hylix, fleshly men to whom the majority of society belonged. This group was lost with no chance of salvation. All right, any questions? Down at the bottom. The Gnostics claimed to be the universal religion which forced the church to assert the Catholicity of her own position. The church had to state divine inspiration of the Old and New Testament, divine inspiration, and so the scriptures are God breathed, and they are there for us to learn and be edified. Church leaders also had to determine the contents of the New Testament canon, and Gnosticism contended that the Christianity was fundamentally a doctrine, and the church. Next page, please. Replied by stating that what doctrine really was. In order to standardize the doctrine of the church, appeal was made by the rule of faith. You listen to the Protestant groups, you will hear that regular idea. From this rule sprang the creeds of Christendom. I will give you a couple of three of the Christian creeds that I just let you read them. The church felt obligated to call for defenders of the faith. The bishops fought the heresies. Now, who are going to become the defenders of the faith besides the bishop? They're alone pretty well, the bishops. You ever heard of the apologist? The apologist. Okay. We're going to talk about the apologists a little bit and different ones that were the apologists that are going to apologize. And so if they're going to be brought up in front of the the Romans or whoever, they're going to explain the side of the real Christians so that they're apologizing for it in a way saying, this is all a bunch of stuff. This is all wrong. We've got the answer, so they're going to be pushed into forming the canon or giving us scriptures. And there's going to be one group that's going to push them to do that. All right. Metaphysical type of mysticism. We've talked about this a little bit. This is where the spiritual essence of man is thought to be absorbed mystically into the divine being and an occasional experience here and now. Following the extinction of his separate personality by death, man's spirit becomes a part of a divine being. The biblical mysticism is where the Bible, in contrast, emphasizes an ethical and spiritual type of mysticism. In other words, we don't understand everything. We just don't. And he's talking about the kingdom to come. Did they all understand the kingdom at the time of Christ and ushering in the kingdom? No. All right. So it is the ethical and spiritual type of mysticism in which the individual is related to God through his identification with Christ and the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. All right, the Neoplatonists, that's who I read from a while ago, thought of absolute being as the transcendent source of all, that is, and from which all was created by a process of overflow. This overflow or emanation finally resulted in the creation of man as a reasoning soul and body. The goal of the universe was reabsorption into the divine essence from which we all came. Philosophy contributed to the process as one engages in rational contemplation and by mystical intuition, seeks to know God and to be absorbed into the once whence we come. Questions? Comments? Do you feel like you're being absorbed from that, from the way they're explaining it? Are you part of an overflow? That God's just so that? That's not the way He created us and why He created us. We're not part of an overflow. That's not what's here. All right, somebody talk to me. Are you confused or frustrated? Overwhelmed? Somebody's shaking their head. Questions? Well, that's why I wanted you to have a 3-ring binder and do some studying, because it's an overwhelming, but yet it's man making up stuff trying to be equivalent to God. Basically saying, God, you did it this way, just like the Church of Christ is saying, we want to go back to the first century, and others are saying, that's not good enough, God. We want to create our own ways of doing things. And so, and I read and see a lot of times preachers saying a lot of the same things that we say, because some of them are they're challenging their faith and their belief system and going, I know I've studied this all my life, but this is not really what the scriptures say. More comments? Well, we'll cover that next week. Because any time they're going to ring the bell. The pendulum is going to swing. All right. So no comment? No question? I know you're overwhelmed right now, or a little. Where'd all this come from? Because it's like an elder said one time. He said in the East Sunshine Church of Christ that I cleaned, he had lost his arm in an accident, so he became what do you call them? Guy that prosthesis. And so he said, my dad was an elder, and now that I'm one, he said, well, my dad was an elder, and back in the old days, being a member of the church was easy. People looked for truth, wanted truth, believed in truth, and that's why they came to church, is to study for truth. And he said, that's not the way people are anymore. He said, everybody's trying to find a different way. Opinion over truth. And so one of the things we saw a while ago is that the Catholic Church is trying to find truth and reason in scriptures instead of finding it on your own. Redevelop the will. All right, I think the bell's going to ring any second, so.